Crickets, yeah, crickets. They had no answer. I did not anticipate that there'd be such a stalwart effort to make sure that the most important thing was that President Biden didn't get anything done. Think about this. What are Republicans for? What are they for? Name me one thing they're for.
Hello and welcome to What the F*** Just Happened Today, your essential guide to the daily shock and awe in national politics. I'm Joe Manchin. Let's get to it. It's Wednesday, January 19th, 2022. Welcome to day 365. Senate Democrats are pressing ahead on voting rights despite unified opposition from Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, and Senate Republicans. A vote on voting rights legislation is expected to happen tonight. Republicans are expected to block the bill, which will prompt Chuck Schumer to then hold a vote to change Senate rules to allow for a talking filibuster, which only covers the voting package, allowing it to pass by a simple majority in the evenly divided Senate. Manchin and Sinema, however, are expected to oppose the proposed changes. Manchin admonished Democrats' efforts to change the filibuster rules in order to pass the voting rights legislation, calling it, quote, a great misleading of the American people, end quote, and a perilous course for the nation, while accusing his Democratic colleagues of trying to take the easy way out by, quote, breaking the rules to change the rules, end quote. Meanwhile, Biden conceded that in order to get his Build Back Better agenda passed, Congress will have to, quote, break it up, end quote, to get as much of it through as possible. Biden said, I'm confident we can get pieces, big chunks of the Build Back Better law signed into law, adding, quote, and come back and fight for the rest later, end quote. Biden pointed to the roughly $500 billion in climate change provisions, as well as funding for universal pre-K and some financing provisions that he said had clear support. Quote, I know that the two people who have opposed, on the Democratic side at least, support a number of things that are in there, end quote, referring to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Moving on, the United States will make 400 million N95 masks available for free at pharmacies and community health centers around the country starting next week. The move, which officials called the largest deployment of personal protective equipment in U.S. history, comes days after the CDC updated its mask guidance to recommend that people wear, quote, the most protective mask you can that fits well and that you will wear consistently, end quote. The masks will be sourced from the Strategic National Stockpile, which has more than 750 million masks on hand. In New York, Attorney General Letitia James accused Trump's business of repeatedly using fraudulent or misleading valuations of its assets in order to get loans and tax benefits. In a court filing on Tuesday, James's office claimed that the Trump organization made, quote, misrepresentations to financial institutions, end quote, including the IRS, lenders, and insurers, and that many of the statements were, quote, generally inflated as part of a pattern to suggest that Mr. Trump's net worth was higher than it otherwise would have appeared, end quote. The filing adds that Trump was, quote, personally involved in reviewing and approving the statements of financial condition before their issuance, end quote. The filing came in response to Trump's efforts to block James from questioning him, as well as Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump under oath. Back in D.C., the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol subpoenaed Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and two other members of Trump's legal team who pursued and disseminated bogus claims of mass election fraud. Benny Thompson, the Democratic chair of the panel, said in a statement, quote, the four individuals we've subpoenaed today advanced unsupported theories about election fraud, pushed efforts to overturn the election results, or were in direct contact with the former president about attempts to stop the counting of electoral votes, end quote. The committee also subpoenaed and obtained records of phone numbers associated with Eric Trump and Kimberly Guilfoyle. Separately, the National Archives will release 4 pages of Trump's White House records to the January 6th committee, despite Trump's pending request in the Supreme Court to block the handover. Moving on, declassified drone footage shows the U.S. military mistakenly killed 10 Afghan civilians, including 7 children, last August during a botched strike in Kabul. The 25 minutes of footage show a car on a residential street with figures moving around a courtyard and children walking along the street. The Pentagon previously called the August 29th strike a tragic mistake, but in November, the Air Force Inspector General released findings of his investigation into the strike, which found no violations of law and did not recommend any disciplinary action. And finally, Biden says he expects Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine. Quote, "I'm not so sure he is certain what he is going to do," Biden said, adding, quote, "Do I think he'll test the West, test the United States and NATO as significantly as he can? Yes, I think he will," end quote. When asked to clarify whether he was accepting that an invasion is coming, Biden said, quote, "My guess is he will move in. He has to do something," end quote. Biden added that the repercussions will depend on what Russia does, but warned that Putin has, quote, "never seen sanctions like the ones I promised would be imposed if he moves," end quote. That's all for now. You can find the links and sources for all of these stories on the main website. And as always, visit whatthefuckjusthappenedtoday.com for the latest news and headlines. Until next time, I'm Joe Amditas.